Start with the opening prayers. On yellow prayer book, page 3. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path. I take refuge in the Buddhas until I attain the essence of awakening. Likewise, I take refuge in the Dharma and in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. Just as the Buddhas of the past gave rise to bodhichitta and progressed along the Bodhisattva's path, so shall I give rise to bodhichitta for the benefit of all beings and practice the stages of the Bodhisattva's path.
Tangke doji jajere zonra shenje mada doja bonjong ba zirja lombo tabara jibeg shakche jarbe jadungu zan zoe durjin janje delo naro tang maba mala juje gambo ba pamo draba jawan ragom Kaju lama namje dai jon je danandana zara damje de lama laba la ye juzo zang la zang yang den jam zang ala dendre donjen de bagale zor chenye zo da zo jen je tena de som shik ba me ye senge gang da ge ma le de da tham je la le dang a ye dang we cha je wo Tagelo Chuson Rover Sinjal of those or Chulam Dan Rover Sinjal of those Lam Trovasi or Sinjal of those or Trovai Chuson Javar Sinjal of those or Kangedin Gender Varnjong Gaba Meba Je Meba Chepa Meba Ta Meba Oa Meba Ro Meba Tade Dume Duje Me Drubani Shadun Ba Zoba Sanje Mananje Tamba de la Sanzar to Trinchin Zabalama Jije Guzon to Jesulam Dada Dage Julam Bede Dage Demba Dansim Jejedo Jajim Bondo Barasinje Labdu Sor Namkatang Nyampesimjin Tamje Jedunda Tindela Meba Yang Tabrazuku Sanje Jekombang Rumbo Chineja Tobarsha Di Chidu Tambechu Kanki Sinde Tonyam Salamar Jo Nyambe Jambas Chanjo Judo Senji Bada Chunimbe Kunju Da Gulong Manurbugun Simban Zal Tela Kang Simbar Save Chune Papa Zambo Juba Mulam Jarbo Dere Tene Tela Tar Rabia Judo Yobananke Rabia Nipa Rabia Nipa Tela Chanjo Sem Mejib Jo Yobananke Yibate Re
And cultivate the motivation, thinking may all sentient beings, limitless as space, attain the state of perfect and complete enlightenment. And think that for this purpose, I'm going to listen to the Dharma and then engage in practice. This motivation of bodhicitta is the unmistaken motivation for listening to the Dharma. And the Dharma we are listening to is the commentary on the prayer for excellent conduct. And now in the main section of the commentary, we have said that there are 16 chapters or sections, and now we are in the second chapter, where we were talking about the 4 causes of not forgetting bodhicitta, and today we are at the 4th cause.
Da Jancho Sem Majibate, Kari Jugibate, Karetris, and a paradoxin batro, Yamselin Bandari. Then the Dachitang around Sunde Munji da Givishini Nambak Sunguyore. Lopuk Chulate, Chupuk Trangate. So Tang Tarang around so Lopuk Chul. Look, when but they sand out there, chulates. Chute Jitin, Chujet in our chamas on Baka, Patrambo, Trambo Trananda. There are girls on kinds and doing Mambosan Royorba. Tang around so Tata de Tata, Jimata in the young. Lopuk chulate, Chupok the Chanchuk Semtor de Goyore. Chanchuk Sem Hibatene, Yimpin Chadayore, Yimpin Lore, Gantar. Yimping lo yonane rang dewa yin jiba hiba deji hiba de chagayore. Yang na yimping lo de soso rang la chern de he jaba na deji hiba de lamne. Lu dewa dan sem jiba hiba de janchuk sem ke yonkayore. Janchuk sem de tsongkang chimbo jeg na ne nyo go na churang la pekha kase yo na nyoya yo ragayo mare. Yena yang janchok semne churang ke semnang la yo deba je teni ta dara mejiba si paradoxin ba drogla ne ya jin su ne teni tigala mutu ne junchong nang go yobaris.
The fourth cause of not forgetting bodhicitta refers to the practice of the 6 paramitas. And so the masters of the past have said that one should first direct one's mind towards the dharma, and then one should direct one's dharma toward a complete honesty, kind of straightforwardness, which means that we should practice the dharma truthfully and not under the influence of the 8 worldly concerns, because we encounter many sense or desirable objects and so on. And so even if we are not able to exactly do that, what we really should do when we direct our mind towards the dharma is to cultivate bodhicitta. And that is really the altruistic mind. And the altruistic mind will bring yourself well-being and happiness to others. Or just from your own perspective, it will bring you onto a path to happiness. You will experience some physical well-being and mental happiness if you cultivate bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is something that you cannot buy in a store, no matter how much money you have. But it's something that you have to cultivate, develop within your own mind. You develop it through these causes of not forgetting bodhicitta, one of which is the practice of the 6 paramitas, and then it is necessary to always remind oneself of that practice on an ongoing basis.
Tara jamba da nyingji serdu de chi soso la kangan dawo tira mi ba ka so chowa te cham ji ge yo mare kha yo mi ba re de den ro mi se je de ching ro dang dawo cha song wa re ta ka le che de kangan dawo chen du ngene ha ko ge yo re ta tara de lama de ba ina kangan che de ha mo de ne rami ji gu de sam no de ne mambo rami ji ro yo ro Tarata jamninje sejo tuso kala labza mambo ja mata paina soso ga ya po nin tana maje paina tata nin de te zan ring tang chimbo jin tong to ko yo mare teni churang ngene ka nga jin chen de tara nyong ya ba de ngene peng ga yo re nga nyamlin jin ke mare de ngarang ta gebshi ni mambo tin tana che ya de ka de de kong na bak song de 다 야휴줄라 팀바 마지 셀 데델 메서 초간저 개지 마뇨 다 로망보 로차비 지니 망보세 로 제니 솜예스만도 망본 로디 지니오 데드테 송송아 땡은에 다다 데리노와 산테니 제 셈나 땡 kantar ta te sunchu ne sam tama ina nguyo ne chorje chanda go yures.
And so when it comes to not this need to cultivate, when it comes to this need to cultivate love and compassion, then sometimes, when for as long as we don't really experience a lot of difficulties in our lives, when we hear that, maybe it doesn't really generate a really deep feeling. And also we are not to blame for that too, because human beings are just sort of like that. But so now when we listen to it, when we listen to some instructions on love and compassion, we might not really listen so carefully, or we might not value them as something really so important. But then at some point, when we do encounter some difficulties in our lives, then we will understand. And then it would have been good if we would have listened to the instructions at that time where we didn't value them so much. So if we listen now well, even though we don't feel anything special right now, what we learn now will be of some benefit later on when we do encounter difficulties. And so I'm not saying that I myself have a lot of experience with that, but I have followed quite many spiritual teachers, and they have spoken about that, and maybe at that time didn't maybe, of course, paid attention, but maybe not really encountered so many difficulties at that time. So maybe didn't feel so much at that time. But then as time went by, as the years went by, a few years later, maybe 1, 2, 3 years later, during certain circumstances that I encountered, I just looked back at what I heard, and I really felt that, what they said at that time, it's really true. That's really how it is. And so that's why it's good to listen to that, because it's really, actually, we're talking about things that do really happen in our real life.
Tendra chanchok sen ta jamba da nyingje shiba de perno soso ge che ro mo sunchu de sosun koryong ro cha de yure to so le che jamba da nyingje ju yo na den soso wa ti jamba da nyingje ti jam ti ge ta kare la go tu kor tu ro ti ti gen ram la ne de du ta ti gen koryong de na jamba da nyingje yo son koryong na de na ne du deni ta soso la che ngune che jamse ke tige pinde na od toku yore tene jamba da nyingje hiba de semnang la namjum che trableng ra od da namjum te sam donang mi na tene kanga te endu ta rami ji ro ya da so chama ngune jamba da nyingje ke mandang ma ke chung je cha yong go yore so yin na yang so rami jin do yo ma re de 강한 트렌드 다 강아들 동리 못하바 차한 거요래 강아라 동리 지지라 지 뭐보 인다지 도도지 흘려용 거 말이 semnang이 잠바다 닌지 문에 다 나랑 그거네 제 잡더레사 세준다 잠바다 닌인데 인사래 다들 문에 ndatabu 강한 뒤투네 당아 근달 잡지 저거 삼산라오지 야 트인 타바이나 드니 간달 저런 그 타직 탁주 베나라미 라오지고 상야 그 탁주 데니처 그 카르마직 난그 삼노지 제나 레간 직루와 텔처 쭉 토바이나 저럼 간달 메체 쪼크 요래 다데게 데니 데그 람네 데니 소소랑네 다 잠바다 닌지게 라메지야다 카르마직 레간 로와 말에 다 잠닌지 그 슬람 스트린드 라미 지야가 탁주 삼노도 요라 때저 도용 거 요로 다 던다지 도 드니 지니 갈래 다 마라는 거네 남주지 잠바다 닌지 실랍자 장긴게 게베시니 남바테 네 그다 삼지 마차바가 가딘 진지리하 세 드니 거네 제 대바당 담아당 양 고네 퍼라다 델레티네 양 소수주라 냠토 밤 퍼발라서 봐 간다르 던다게 딘르 투르고 안게 드니 피니용 침보요 봐 tanda yoruba
So, for example, if you are staying in an environment where your companions or the people in your environment are some people who cultivate love and compassion, then clearly, if you are surrounded by these kind of with these kind of people, then that naturally will be of greater benefit also for yourself to cultivate loving kindness. And then it reminds you of that. But you pay interest. But if you do not pay attention to that, maybe if you're not in that environment and you don't really pay much attention to that, then when you encounter difficulties in your life, sometimes people even commit suicide. And when that arises, that kind of mind of wanting to do that arises, it is a sign that there is not enough love and compassion in one's mind. One hasn't cultivated that too much. Because nobody really wants to commit suicide, but sometimes people are just too overwhelmed with their difficulties, with their suffering. They just cannot handle it at all. And at that time, if that thought of compassion arises within you, of love arises within you, then you would, even for that moment, just think that this is my only protection. This is my only thing to put hope in. It is love and compassion. So then, if you're able to remember that at such a time of great difficulty, it could really protect your life. Because taking your own life could be an activity of just 1 minute. And if you are able at that time to turn your mind and remember love and compassion, then that has already saved your human life. So therefore it's good to reflect on cultivating love and compassion, because then later when you do encounter difficulties in your life, you will be able to remember, oh, this is what I've heard from my spiritual teacher. The teacher taught me on love and compassion. Really, his kindness is truly inconceivable. And it is at that moment where you think of that, what you have learned with gratitude, that your faith and your pure view will increase. And then, because things are interdependent, also your experience and realization will increase.
Alright, nangata jambata nyingje shibata nyamni chidu parada simba togalan jigo yore sumbare ten da parada stog nange dambo de jimba parada simba de chado yore tene jimba para jin shibate pate ba kton re tene telagta chur yewando nansi seba no sum nam ndog yore chama dambo de sanjing ki jimba son nor sosola je cha phoba kan yuna re tani yinda ga ta jong bo na chi jimba tong ju deng ne kar chim bo teren ka chang da ga she ke ma jo ne pa dami tani simji ta de song gu mi cha mi to so la ta ro ram chi a de ngune ta ne ta to so je hla ro wen na ta to so me na so yin sam sa ta ro pa chin kin do hla ngune to so in sa ri sam sa no hla roba jam kin so tanda yong go yore yang ga hen na tani tanda ka sen na ki chim bo cha de yore den tanda yin za da jim ba tong ju de kar chim bo re si pen ma kha kom den kin je yin na churang ke cho kham ba kang la de ta kha kang ba cho kha kang te na kan ra ke pin tho yore 다 남주 카고냐 데서 냠뇽미나 데 흉내도 소데스 소라 데서니 살랍잘레 주요레 데 노르 산생 짐바스.
Then when we cultivate, when we practice love and compassion, so the actual practice of love and compassion is the practice of the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections. The first one of which is the paramita of generosity. And the literal meaning of this term in Tibetan is to give. So you give something. And there is a threefold division for generosity. The first one is the giving of actual material things. Anything, material wealth, or just a cup of tea. Practicing generosity is very important when you think about someone, for example, who is very poor or is sick. Any sentient being that is without protection, without help. If you help them, that is of great benefit. You become like a god to that person. Because most people do feel like holding back and stingy about their wealth, and therefore practicing generosity is very important. If you just think about the benefit, for example, think about a person who is very thirsty, and you just hold some water, give some water to their mouth. What kind of benefit is that? Only that is a great benefit. And if you do not have a lot of experience with real thirst, then I recommend you do a Nyungne retreat. Then you will know how that is, and then you will see the benefit. So that's the first kind of generosity, which is the giving of material things.
Tene da nipa de la chuji jimba hyo bare da chugu tone jimba tongyanda. Da jimba tamche nang ke zo de cha de yuru chugu jimba hibanda. Da chugu jimsar de kare resen zo che yu jamba da ninji de zo ko tone tene so so la de sa lapa lomyer da na yaba yonda de so. Tene pa yin la te ba de cha ang yuru ba. Da chugu jimba nang da ming jimba de cha de sanzeng jimba do yore. Sanzeng jimba na ming jimba yorwa mi ngang mi sa. Kayasin na chu de semji mi nang yi cha de yore. Te yang ga he de tin si pare o namba ke teni jimba hira tong ko mdo samsan ro yong tin si pare. Te namba ma yin ba ke tin gri lag men da. Yang cham cha nga so namba ke hira jimba tang mdo ba samsan ro su su la. Ngarang te tin si pare singe la ku yo ba ha ko ma son da. Teni tande ngone jimba lap chimbo hyue je tang ko yore te ha ko yore te ha ma na yang te sa ti konon da de tem do ya ke chung de yong yore. Te kare re se du namba sanje be chu hi ban de lo ni tong trukja da halang trukja cha ro yore. Ti ke reng la tat sat ni tong trukja ke hu je na de do te ni zong de ta changba de nin ji tsar de tong ya bo ke chu de 다 사체 다 남박 작가 가와이 나타다 요지를 다 ngarang la chaju yo bachane bu ba raw jik sana tawaina pinsun changwaina bu ke me ke cheso kan no song tang jagar tang bu ni pa la langkor yo mar nam ro yo mare ta na sekol du de yo marwa de gang teni lamga yo ta tab de po yo mare 당 무말랑 고요로 다데 따버지 토네 테니 저속에 문지 개바 개비히니 남바가 까블레자 최소 로송 땅나 간다르테 따버 제 테니 대자 마세바게다 다 보를 인다 첨보체 여마르다 세르만보 요사레 다 다른 거상 하고 마서 미마 요사르와 세르만보 세르 등상이 요저라 등아 히라 당당 점마서 되네 다 세르테스락세 참아 야 자갈라 야 피요이로다 다 다른 것한테는 가랑서 에코노미스데 가르침 보차도 세르 때 이나야 꼭 락세데 참아 되네 야 자가게 기브히니 담들 피야 바래 대자마세바게다 자금 다 추다 리온 도소다 야 자침볼 저와 예야 자그 사자 고랑라 대다 of course 뭐 자들아 다그 자가 그 사자 고랑라 자간 박부 열세 땅나로는 마랍사파르와 부바크 마라사와 너 셈낭라야 자간 박부 열세 제 사자 고랑라 자치보 저거야 주 주기도 bubake. Ta tetso zo yuade karere. Ta di chu sejundela. De zamka rintang ya le, se le labo rintang ya. Mtse sosu mtse le labo rintang ya. Sosu mrab jima tamje ke ta halama sunu soso ka ranyol le tsache wa ke rintang ya. De zam kantar tsama lu tang ya ba. Tang ne nyar de ba ke danyar je yon ba ke chu se ba de. Ta jimba tang ka yorwa. Ta tela lazu chiba jimba je yorwa se. Ta drasang no tangwa ina. Tene ngune chu se ke jimba se jida ka dralap chin chin sare. Ta nge pupa te ngarang la chaju chimba yuba chani hubari ma ta pupa ma yinba ke nangba jaka tamje te tab nangka yu pa tenki barwa.
Then the second kind of generosity is the giving of the dharma. And the giving of the dharma is the most important one of all forms of generosity. So the way we give the dharma is first of all, we cultivate a mind of love and compassion, and then we give the dharma with that intention. And because the dharma is actually like medicine, it actually within giving the dharma, also the giving of material things is included, because the dharma really is like a medicine for the mind. And so, for example, someone might think that in Buddhism we don't practice so much generosity. And I'm not even speaking about non-Buddhists saying that. Even within Buddhism, people could say that. It's possible that they would say that. But actually, if you really think about it deeply, then you would see that actually we engage in vast activities of generosity in the Buddhist practice. So one shouldn't misunderstand that point. For example, in terms of giving the dharma, how precious we regard the dharma that we give. So the dharma originated about 2,600 years ago in modern India. And if you just think about that and how it was given with love and with compassion 2,600 years ago up until today. And so there are many Buddhist countries in the world, and I'm just giving one example, the example of Tibet, just because I myself am Tibetan. So in the past, the Tibetan people would really consider the Dharma so precious that they would even spend their own life, kind of they would expend their own life in order to get the Dharma. In the past, for example, in order to get the Dharma, people would travel to India, and at that time, of course, there were no vehicles, there were no cars and no airplanes and not even bicycles. And so people had to travel all the way to India. The past masters endured so many hardships, and they really risked their own lives in order to receive the Dharma. And they really considered that to be even more precious than gold. And gold was, of course, in the past something that was very precious in Tibet. Nowadays, there's probably not even that much gold in Tibet, but anyways, in the past, it was considered the most valuable metal. And even now in our economy, for example, people consider gold as something very precious. So in the past, gold was the most precious kind of currency in Tibet. And in order to get the Dharma, those masters would turn everything they owned into gold, and then would exchange that for the Dharma. They would bring that to India and exchange that for the Dharma. And so now India, therefore, is referred to as this noble land of India. And of course, that is on the basis of the Dharma and the culture and the people and so on. But it is mainly now because of the Dharma that we have received. And I, for example, am a Tibetan of the newer generations. And still, what the other Tibetans, the elder Tibetans have passed on to me, even in the present day, is that this land of India is so precious because of the Dharma. That's why I refer to it as the noble land of India, because it is where the Dharma had originated. And the Dharma is, the value of Dharma far exceeds the value of gold in one's lifetime. So even after many generations have passed, even now, the Tibetan people like myself consider it as very precious. And now this Dharma that is so precious is given, the generosity of giving the Dharma. And really what could be greater than that? If you really think about it, there is nothing greater, nothing higher than the generosity of giving the Dharma. And so I'm just giving Tibet as the example because I myself am Tibetan, but of course there are many Buddhist countries in the world who will have the same view about that.
Churang randong dubzi yin saya ka tsik je yo mari denana. Yinping ki chi du yinda sen ta ngarang zu le message in ro dan ro te tin ko yore de sok. Ta te tin ta ngarang zu ngone yang ta je so so ge chu tsik je hi na yang de yin la pin tho ya ge chi de pe ju ma dang na. De ni so so randong dubzi ke je pe ju tang ya wa na na le jum de si de ke le la bu yal sa mari sam san je yong ko yore is. Le jumde hibande yudami sejodene techo mogubare kansina pa song dan son rebe jedo te le jumde re pa hyoba delek se de cher hyoba delek pa chengin ba je lan cher chingi je la chingi takta malam na mandu banam je yong do wa de le jumde re ta le jumde de jewa sama je la miya ge sang dang de wa na no res yang jewa sama je le tin mi ya mi ba chama ta ta mi yong ba jang jang la sang ta na no ri le jumde de ka du mi se lab hi ya yong ma re ngene ngarang so le jumde se je ta sam no ngene ton de so so ra ni ngene na ngene lem de jing khor sang sam san ro chon nang je go ya mang bo yong ge re sam no ya bo ta na ngene ta ne ten de je le jumde khor sang sam no jing khor wa zan je chu je nyam to ban to bo ji nyam ni chim bo ji yin go ma re Churang lemde kalangune samno yapo tongkinji na. Te ten de ngarang so che o nge le jumde no ko mi si kainsa nge mase mi si kuma ku mi si. Te zamna marida. Churang ke chuchu ni gi tsabi na na churang ke jidang, rodang, dukdang tu su chama lemde re. Ngune tane. Tene chamsan ta che so so ngune o ngak te che so ma tik tren ta ti lemde de ngune khor so ndo samsa ndu o ngama ji la tanda che ya imbas ta treng ne ti lemre de ngal khor sari samde ti ma yimba ke tanda ji in de ni yang nin ji ji yang ne tan o hya cha nin ji ni ta ngamsa ma do kol lemre de khor ji ba samsa da ji ta tanda ro ji ri to kandar lemre se ji te ngarang so ke do de mi pe tem ranzong ke tem ji ranzong ke tem ji
So even if we just look at 2 or 3 pages at any given sadhana, any dharma text, for example, it contains the practices of refuge and cultivating bodhichitta. And what that really shows us, like right in the beginning, the message that is given to us through the refuge and the bodhicitta is that these spiritual masters of the past have worked hard for the benefit of others. So it is for the benefit of others. There is not a single word contained in this text that is aimed at accomplishing one's own selfish purpose. So therefore, even if you only have one word or one line of dharma, it has to be used for the benefit of others. If it is not used for the benefit of others, but used for one's own purpose, then karma will kind of not let you kind of off the hook so easily. So karma will come around. And there is no need to have any doubts as to whether or not karma really exists, because it's a simple principle. Whatever you send out will come back to you. For example, if you say good morning to someone, they will probably respond with good morning. Or if you insult someone, then they will probably say something unpleasant in return. But even if they don't say anything, they will probably give you an expression of disgust or something. They will make it be known that that was not pleasant. So that's karma. And when we think about the ripening of karma, so karma is that it's cause and effect. So we engage in an action that has a certain effect and a result. So if we think that, well, that's something that will happen in future life, so karma will ripen. Karma will ripen sometime in some future lives. That's a mistaken. But also to think that everything will ripen right now in this life and nothing will ripen in future lives, that's also mistaken. We cannot really say when exactly karma will ripen, but it will ripen. And so what really helps is, if you really think about it carefully, like how karma really actually ripens and how one thing leads to another in your own personal experience. Because even if maybe your realization and your level of practice is not so high, if you really think about karma well all the time, then you will really gain an understanding of what it really is. So for example, then you wouldn't think that, oh, I know karma, I haven't done anything wrong. For example, I haven't killed anyone, I didn't steal anything. But it's not just that, actually. It's everything, completely everything you do within 24 hours of a day, all the time. The way you do things, the way you walk, the way you sit, anything, whatever you do, this is all karma, this is all the cause. And so when you keep thinking about that, then at some point maybe something happens to you, and then you might look back and think that, oh, it's because I did that before in the past, now it's coming back at me. That's the result of that. And then if you recognize that in yourself, and then also if you see somebody else do what you yourself did in the past, then you will be able to feel compassion for them and feel that, oh, this poor thing, now he's doing this negative action, but it's just a question of time when this will come back at him. So karma, if you have karma, you really have the actual kind of natural law with you. It's like the self-arisen natural law. So therefore it's really important to pay good attention to that.
Tene jimba samba de la magic ba chap ji jimba song. Ta te tara mambo je ke te nyamli nang ke yori namba yinare ma yinare te ngune tane hansaya ke jisi rang yo bare. Magic ba chap ji jimba hiban de simjin ke seso hlwa dere. Simjin ka heta hiera da dron na du tin chol nyone da chindo tene chetar tona. Ndere Then my bata so gepena and a chet and him to so j dam me batana chando matanjo tin sur dabo jane tini yana to solo pa shan deb jan tana chindo ngune tan to so tam me bu jab jimba hi jimba nyamni chindo ko yore ta nga so mangbo chege te ten zang te hangsaya ke yaboris te ngarang so ke tana serna tam batroma chi yin yang ko che seso la ninka yu sa lan do na te se ninka min sa la pa che zo go lo ta yang ro dang ta yin da ma na su su gang ba de ti khala ngu sa ha ko yin de ti gang ba ti khala ma za ma ya ba je ta da chi sam no che ta na ya bo yu re ta ina gom nan de yo re se gom nan ngin sam sang e gom na ya de gi re si gom ba kap so chorang ju la che jan chuk sam ro ya chi tini gom yor ra tini sim tike luti trama popa sam ju khola yang gewa ke bacha yon ro yo re yang na ta ko hienang da da jong ma zong wa kar chim bor wa bas sim jin tan ji yo ra phokse de la phogre finger wa ti nga rang te lung khong khon te chawa ja ping do ta koran zo dongan na yo ra te jan jo sam ka tama te ra ping race.
And then the third kind of generosity is the generosity of giving fearlessness and giving protection. And this is a practice that is practiced a lot in Buddhism, but also doesn't have to be Buddhist. And whoever practices in this way really wholeheartedly rejoice in that. It's really an incredible activity. For example, to save the lives of sentient beings. When you go to like a butchery where animals are being murdered, then if you save their life, it's you have given life. Or, for example, if you take in a stray dog or a stray cat without an owner and care for them, or even make a donation to a charity who looks after strayed animals, that is all a practice of practicing generosity of protecting from fear. And that's really a most incredible way of giving. Or, for example, even if you see a little insect, like an ant, and you see that their life is in danger, then you could pick it up and put it somewhere where it's safer. Or if you're walking and you see that you could step on an insect, then you would be mindful not to step on it. And even if you just meditate on such giving of the protection from fear, that is also actually a good practice in itself. For example, if you just cultivate bodhichitta and you just meditate on bodhichitta in your mind, and then with bodhichitta in your mind you're walking around, then anyone who is touched by even just your shadow will benefit from you, will have a virtuous imprint put into their mind, will be granted fearlessness. For example, it's just like we benefit from a fan when it's hot, and similarly, other sentient beings like insects benefit from your shadow as you are walking by them, and it benefits them because of your bodhicitta, and that is really what helps beings when they suffer.
Tene da tsutram hibandela yang som yore tenang ga dambo de la niju dombu tsutram se ta dikpa nare na pan zemne chi ma go thorap chi jete la hyo yore te niba de la gewa chudu ga tsutram se ta gewa nare na tsudrubwa dere per na choran langa den rodu manan kholo tan ra yona te ko phat chik tru nan ro tam na ya bo yore la kan chi na ya ye kor ya nan ro tam na yapo yoris ta tel so wat sama sakang sen slon in rodira teni tara yin la ta pechari teni ta ke garin una chebar yo mare namba sanje ba ke chu ke pecha de so thamje la te ngaran so ke kuyap jiban de so thamje te gwa chudu ku chram cha de yorwa teni ta simjin tongzi ku chram hi ba de de so klan de yimpin de byan de cha de yores.
And then the second paramita is the paramita of ethical discipline, and that has also 3 points. The first one is called the discipline of refraining from negative action, and that means to even refrain from the slightest, even a single negative action. Then the second kind of ethical discipline is the discipline of gathering virtue, which is to practice even the slightest virtues activity. For example, if you come across a prayer wheel as you walk somewhere, then you would just spin it walking by. Or if you are at a temple, you would go around that temple in a clockwise manner. Or if you see a Dharma scripture, and it doesn't matter in which language, any Dharma scripture, you would treat it with great respect. So that's the discipline of gathering virtue. And the third one is the discipline of acting for the benefit of sentient beings. And so that refers to the practice of the engagement of activities with the altruistic mind.
Ta teo de zuba de la yang yawa sumre tenang ta tambo de yin ju lo drop le zuba se ta lo drop servan da tere yin ke nu jin yong ro tene so yin ke so le jung ju yong ban da wo ta tene yin ke kan dar so la ta mundu ba ke sawa kang dang ka je yong ba yin na ya to so lo zuba de tambo de re tene ni ba de la tene Chusar the kawa jubu zuba cha de yore. Tini de Canada Risina, Tang around to number Sanjib chu drug do tene circuit in parche mambo. Nanki Nyumon Tongala suba ke in parche mambo yo de Samala tini zutaba de cha de yore. Yeah.
Then next is the third is the paramita of patience, and patience also has 3 kinds. And the first one is the patience that patiently forbears the harm caused by others, and that could be anything. For example, so actual harm, or it could also mean to be patient when others criticize you or point out your faults, or it could mean if others just do things that you do not approve of, then you would practice patience. Then the second kind of patience is the patience that forbears the hardships involved in the Dharma practice. For the sake of Dharma, you're enduring hardships for the sake of Dharma. And now, in the context of practicing the Buddha Dharma, we might encounter various different external obstacles and difficult circumstances. And on the inner level in our minds, we might experience all sorts of disturbed states of minds, like negative thoughts and emotions. So to be able to practice with them patiently is the second kind of patience.
Ta chu chi de zuba chi ba di zuba ni ban de ta tara nang nyang ni jing kin pe mang bo yele ta de nyang ni nang kin ngi ma yu de ban de ting sang mi ba ro ma re dan de kan da ri sin nang ga he ge ta hyo ngi ma ta de nyang ni nang ki yu de ban ro ting sang mi de wa tan da ma re ting sang de chu to le zuba de jing ne mang bo ji yan do Hyopa Ngapo Lang, Gonda Chipo Nyal, Teni Soso Gechi Pugatang, Namatamjela, Tato Goho Yorite, Te the Hurt Daronchi Sosoke, Ta Tele Tato Chiala Lakpoke, Chuk Serdamune Kawachiene, Ta Chi Tandranang Kipi Mambo Tarangan Juro Tamjena and Jia Doa Mambo. That the Zubak and Yamitina, oh, te or take te chindo. Oh, didn't te song you take a te chindo some sound or run to ya Yujono Rindo. That Chunang and te song your race. Oh, didn't Tima take a te chindo, Takta chindos. Did it just around Major and General Chan, no? Then that data would have Mambonjia or Muneran there. Then Zuba Samba Dana, Samitula Matab Zuba song. Ta samitun si de tomba ni ta dami ba ta ta so devi indi tini ta yang samsan tini gwa norne tini tomba ni na jiang mi ba yin sari tini le jumre yu samari samsan ro la soba ke tini hinang je yong gu ro tomba ni se la tomba ni la te chang wa je yong gu ro ta de so tamje le zu ne ta zu se de ta mentu ne che ngarang so namju ke ja he ba yin na 냠geb라고 지네. 다 문투네. 문에 똥이 간다치린도. 간다베 똥혼도. 똥처럼 간다린도. 똥바데 하고는 그바 가린도. 핀토 가린도. 다 드라베 짜는데. 되네 똥이 다 대짜는도 붙세나 깔베만 보여로 와데. 대소르소 바데라. 삼무톤람 라브소 바서.
Regarding the second kind of patience, the patience of forbearing the difficulties for the sake of the Dharma. There are actually a lot of practitioners who really practice that actually. For example, there's many who have been already practitioners in the past and they still are now. So there are many Dharma friends who really practice that kind of patience. For example, they get up really early in the morning and they go to bed late at night, and they might have a family and children to look after. So they have to do that. And then on top of that, they also try to practice the Dharma. And that really involves a lot of hardships because they have to also fit that in their very busy schedules. And there are a lot of Dharma friends that we know that do that. And so that is a practice of patience, patient forbearance. So we can think about it and think that, so this is what it is said in the Dharma, in the teachings, and look, that person is doing that. So when we see that, then we really can't help but rejoice in that. And there's so many examples for us to see. So that's the second one. And the third kind of patience is the patience of remaining fearless with regard to the ultimate profound truth, which refers to the truth of emptiness and selflessness. And sometimes you might gain a misunderstanding of that. So one, for example, thinks that because everything is empty, nothing whatsoever exists. So therefore, maybe there is no karma. And then because of that thought, fear arises. So, and then also one might have doubts about emptiness and so on, and fear arises. So all of that one practices patience with, which means that one doesn't give up, but one continues on in the practice, in one's kind of investigation on emptiness. So one, even though these thoughts arise, we continue on trying to understand emptiness. What is emptiness, and how are things really empty? What does that really mean? And if I understand emptiness, what's the benefit of understanding? And why is it necessary to understand that, and so on? So then if one continues to practice and endure different hardships on one's pursuit to realize emptiness, that is the third kind of patience, the patience that forbears the fear with regard to the ultimate profound truth.
Tande yang samu tongla tra hibande che cha na wo ya ne pacher tra jiko sin tenda ya ba maris. Se pacher tongba ni ti na ga he tra hinang je si ba ri si te za mari ngus sungwa ris. De nam to za mari ngus sungwa ris. Te sungwa lo ju yo re ngma jo je ke dami hien du dami le ni yore kanzak dami de chuji dami sen dambo kanzak dami to goyorwa kanzak dami de gelong ne chedin tra yapu ni de ne te ma song do dami kong nam ni song de te to ba so kan kan to bo la de kong nam ni le bi kanzak dami song de te ni trolle ro rin do kanzak dami tron halama so che gan pe yin gan te ni chu gelong ni da gelong mari da gelong mari da gelong tawa ganang ji na kanza da mi se ta kan sa khorang ke nyam ni tan thum bo cha ang go yora de chu ji da mi sung de ni den zer sia ta ma song ro nang si chu ji da mi na te ma song de ta te ta wa tang de ni de ma ye ba ta hiram nim bo don de ta tong ba ni ma bo yora hiram nim na tin ga he ga am cho to song gam ne hiram nim bo don de den ro wen ro sta te chu ba na na ta na yong ko yoro son za de 마음 발랑하는 속에 디 담이나 핀 따고 요로 핀 따도 핀 따살 간잔라면 테시바요 시고요로데 저소하 고고도 파크마 토니라차 나랑서 저간에 코 토니라차 성시 항상 다코데 페드그런 넘버 산제바게 핀토야 그 메히 리무도산 르탄야나 데니 ndeke 말와.
So regarding this fear of with regard to the ultimate meaning, the ultimate truth, so it's not just a concept, really, oh, this is something like that doesn't really concern us right now, doesn't concern me now because I'm not there yet. Maybe that's something that will happen in the future when I realize emptiness. It's not like that, actually. It does really happen in real life. For example, there's this one story about a teacher who gave teachings on the two kinds of selflessness. So the two kinds of selflessness is first the selflessness of the individual person, and second the selflessness of all phenomena. And the first one is that one has to realize is the selflessness of the individual person. So that's the first teaching that he gave. And he gave this teaching to a monk, a gelong, and he was really authentic, a very good monk. And he gave these teachings on the selflessness of the individual person to that monk. And when that monk heard about that, he felt so delighted and happy about it, because this teaching on selflessness of the individual person really was in harmony with his own personal practice. So then he was very delighted and overjoyed when he realized these teachings. And then next, a teacher gave him the teachings on the selflessness of all phenomena. But in response to that, he said, please don't tell me anything about that. He didn't want to hear anything about the selflessness of phenomena. So that's one thing that could happen, because it doesn't really agree with what we normally practice. Or for example, when we read the Heart Sutra, and that's something we read a lot, and in the Heart Sutra, it's all about emptiness, so many things that do not really exist, that are empty. And so often people also rather close their ears before they want to hear about that. So it happens all the time, and also to Dharma practitioners. And also later in the future, now when you come to actually benefiting sentient beings, and you meet someone to benefit. So there's all kinds of people that you will meet to benefit. So for example, if you meet someone that makes you think that, oh, this person is not going to realize emptiness. This, like, for example, if you tell them about emptiness and they just cannot and are not very receptive for it, then you might think that, oh, this person, the Buddhist teachings are nothing for that person. The Buddhist teachings can't really help that person. So then you just give up on that person. You forsake that person. So that is something that should not happen.
nga zola de samton la trapa chandrawa kani yongdu ko yore sedu jarwa kanjur ta de ki tin rewa tinjur yorwa to sola to san lomnyer chi sedu ngaran so he no ko yore da hangne ta o nge kanda chi to gugri tanda po de mambo samsang da da o tanda teng sapo samsang da ran hin chan do de tanda no ma yong bak de go at kar chimbori then that the would yaba zundu chipar the simba de la yang som yore gochi zundu se da gocha hiba de da mun ge give hini na ba ge kable kanda jabya mu ji da give hini mai ne jirtang ge chi chuba tham je ge kable kanda jam ne nyamni na yas tam bichula da then so go to so ha go ton da ngarang so yang then 제 담자르다 고차 히바 담자로 이직 지기인 삼상 그더라 담자 띵버주고 요래 데레 다 간달 추고 돌아 되는 이바데라 조르브 존르스 다 조르브 존르 히반데네 존르데 추비준이진 띵제 앙송 요래 추오가 준나이 추오데 거만데 만본도 요라 된데마다 땅아 드렌 토마스 산이 지기인 산이 양낭 지기인 다 로지마지긴 스마다 파파 장도디 땡아란스 메체네는데 코 조본 더 요장 되네 다 조르존데 가르침 뭐 차대 요래 만투네 냠니 나야데 되네 숨바데라 초파르 menzimbe 존드 당한 대점 렉송스 당한 대점 네 대점 추시게 요다 디안 출라다 추 희고야 게임도 섬사노 근데 뭔가서 중도 만보 연거 요래 nge te cham yamni che tanga dawa chikla chal de da ti phanchu da go samar sam san ro ngaran su ju pamjer tamje la chohi chi mata chu go thola lam sang chohi chi wa dan da ma ri pa je go yo ro ti chna te song go yo
Then also with regard to the patience of the fear regarding the ultimate truth. For example, it also could happen when you're studying the scriptures, like the Gangyur and the Dengyu, which are the Buddha's words and their commentaries. Like a kind of a fear can arise in the context of learning too. For example, you might think that how am I going to do all of this? How am I going to learn all of these texts? And you might think that, and on top of that, this is also profound. So it's possible that these thoughts arise. So but it's important for one to persevere and not give in to those thoughts. And so then the fourth paramita is the paramita of diligence. There's 3 kinds of diligence. The first one is called the armor-like diligence, which is like a kind of a protective armor. And for example, think about the hardships that the masters of the past have endured for the sake of the Dharma. And even if they are not masters, there are so many Dharma practitioners who endure many hardships for the sake of Dharma practice. So the armor-like diligence is to persevere nevertheless. And armor also has to do with a commitment or determination. I'm going to do this. So that's the armor-like diligence. The second one is called the diligence of application, the engaging diligence, which means that without procrastination, practice should be sustained continuously like a flowing river, like a stream. on an ongoing basis without putting things off. For example, thinking that not today, tomorrow I will practice, or not right now, but next year I'm going to practice. Because if we procrastinate and put things off for a later time, our lifetime actually passes by really quickly. So it's very important to use the time we have to apply the dharma and to engage in practice really like a continuous stream, continuously. And then the third kind of diligence is called the insatiable diligence, which means that you cannot get enough of practice. So you don't think that, so that's good enough for now. Or for example, if I teach the Dharma and say that that's good enough for now, now I don't need to say anything more. So this kind of fault happens all the time. We think that, so now I have done my practice and we feel satisfied with it and we feel like that's enough for now. And basically we should never really have enough. We should never feel like, and now, for example, I've done 1 month of retreat and that's what I wanted to do, that's enough. So we should never feel like this kind of contentment that now it's enough. Because, for example, when it comes to our material wealth or money and so on, we never feel like we have enough. But when it comes to Dharma, very quickly we feel that we've had enough. So the insatiable diligence means that one doesn't become a kind of complacent and feels that now I've done enough.
Tene da nga pa samtin ji phar de sim ba de la yang som yore. Tambo de la jipa nirju ke samtin son. Da jipa da nirju se dan de donda kare re hyuna. Da samtin ke nyamlin ji de nyam zen de chowa je yo de barwa. Chowa de kare dev nyam se junde de zukpo la da jab yong ba ina ya chowa dewa ma to donga yong ma ta ba de cham konpar do ya yo de ba. Tene sarv nyam shibandene ta tene ngaranzo chimo munkong nang ke munkong nang to tene dabu wu harwa nang yi kandar chimo mana na mek chama ma chom de dewa ina tarong chi sar lami ko sar cha ke nawa de huchimbo yo de ba ta tene moto pa nyam shibandene tene amcho ge cha la tene ngaranzo dong per ne dong Drache de na drat zo sar amcho ko melin drat zo melin se ta mutu ba no chan go yoro ma to pa nyam ta ting zin la te zo ma ti ba amcho wonde je ta mari ta ya amcho wonde je san ti nyam yor la jo ma as ta ti something ne ting zin sem se ji ne ro ra da yoris ta ti nyam de la ma yin ran yin cha yang go yoro ngarang su su je 세계 요말 야때서 강로 간자게 파파 그 팔람 탑되와 된다이나 양 디냠을 흰게 요래 디냠을 흰게 요래 때감 냠솜도 와다나 대삼도 보냐 찌르 찌 가와 찌르 찌 찌와 요래 다 디냠도 소 디 요브자 디냠을 흰도 요래 당 아주 찾아지 뭐고 양 톤로디 디냠들 흰물로서나 송용고 요래 때 다라감도 이와 세디 something 때 이와 담보데 데레 아니요 제 카나로 브라한 야이인데 거 가다 주로 선초 듣고 말해봐 브라한 야 선초는 건강 그라 보고 제 카나라 ngamo 야나 거 가다 주 ngara 제 ngamo 제 린 야 탑시 지나데 거 만두는 거 이제로 뭐냐 저러 아서 잠았다 나 녀가 저다 ngamo
Then the fifth paramita is the paramita of meditation, and there are 3 kinds of meditation. And the first one is called the meditation that are the routines of the childish. And what I refers to is that in the beginning when we meditate, we might, as a result of meditation, we experience different kinds of meditative experiences during our meditation. When these experiences arise, we might cling to them. For example, the first experience that might arise is the experience of great bliss. And that is such a great state of physical well-being and mental well-being that even if someone would shoot an arrow at you, at your body, you would only feel bliss. You would not feel any pain. So that's this experience of bliss. And then a second experience that might arise in meditation is the experience of clarity, which is, for example, even if you are in the dark of night and your eyes are closed, there is this experience, this feeling of luminosity, like a radiant moon in the dark night. So that's clarity. And then the third experience you might get is the experience of non-thought or non-conceptuality, where the mind is so single-pointedly focused that even if one would blow a conch horn right into your ear, you wouldn't even pay any attention to it. It's almost like you wouldn't hear, which doesn't mean you are deaf, but it's just your focus is so single-pointed. And so now this happens also to ordinary people, practitioners, and on the path of the noble ones. There's this kind of three experiences that arise in our meditation, and we develop an attachment to them because one experience is more pleasant than the other. So they get more and more increasingly more pleasant. And in the context of Mahamudra later on, we are instructed to not be attached to these meditative experiences. But at first, when they arise, we are like, that's why it's called the childish routines. Childish because in the beginning we are just like a child that is attached to something. For example, if you give a child something sweet, you put it in their mouth, and then you try to take it out of their mouth again, then they will probably be very unhappy. They will cry. So it's just like that. First you give them a taste of this bliss, and then you kind of taking it away again.
Tene ta nipa tela tongran jib something songyore tongran jib something should carry serdu ta hi desar mado banyam le hin de banyam ji yoswa di nyam de le hin pa pang ro yore tan do so ha jang hi tra yore ta nyam lin jing nang do kin ina de ha ko yu juri yin pe chal tu sa ma je na pa cher ti ke trawa de hal kok des kale khapo yore kantar karisna nyam tang Teni ro nyungwa teni tarong chebar chenpo yore nangla, nangsi sipata na raho raho. Ta nyamla himpa de pa pang, yin na yang, de something ke ro tarong nyung yo mare, something ke ro de nyung yo mare. De ma nyung na yang, teni di ke nyingpo yora ta, nyingpo serdu ta de pa de ngarang su, ta gong ke parche chi hu de ndonzo rewa ndonzo yingwa. Yingwa pang ru nyingpo ji yora nyingpo de la hin yong ko yora yang nyingpo de la hin na teni de ma tu gom de wa de la teni tongram ji pa something.
Then the second kind of meditation is called the meditation that utterly distinguishes the meanings. And so what that means is that, so in the first level of meditation, so we first have developed these experiences of bliss, clarity, and non-thought, non-conceptuality, and we have developed some attachment, some clinging to these experiences. So here in the second level of meditation, this clinging is abandoned. And there is, of course, a very deep and detailed explanation that can be given on that. And those who have done some practice might be familiar with that, but if one hasn't really at all studied the scriptures, then it might be a little bit difficult to understand the subtleties here. There's some there's some nuances here that things are quite similar, but there are some differences, because there is a difference. There's a very subtle difference between a meditative experience, and the tasting of flavor, literally. So experiencing something and really tasting its flavor is slightly different. So here in the second level of meditation, we have already abandoned the clinging to experiences, but one has not yet experienced the actual flavor of meditation. So the greatest hindrance or obstacle to one's meditation is various distractions, and so one might then apply an antidote to those, but then one becomes attached to the antidote.
Then da sumba de la tegin ki ba give something here. Da tegin ki ba give something ki bande tini chuni number mo to ba tingin zila nen ro anda cha do yo baris. Da tingin zi chama ta kanda tin na mande ba yo mar ti sumbo na garon na. Den da ti sumbo per na sumga tingin zira. Tin ang ka tambo dev something na ta ngaran so la tara. Gom chizu chil jamna karma chi ni sala semnang la chowa chi ma ngarsu ndo them na chi ma len jagen ro yungku yu dang me na ta tana ro chi de du de na wa ina ta dev something tin khongsun de ge dev something ina zubol da jan ya da pha ya tarong jap de na de ro wa ti ka da ja da na parwa tarong gom jan Semna chek ma lu chakchan rina ya jab to nada yor zupot. Te da deva ke samdin sandu yor devanyam. Tu zon dang deng ne che zo gro. Che zo und devanyam ne che zo und terawa. Dang go tsuksa no. Ne ta do kare la ye wa si jinang de na sama sandu yor is. Sivanya chu nang ta tambo te yong ye yora tambo devanyam tenis aranyam.
Then the third kind of meditation is the virtuous meditation of the Tathagatas, of the Buddhas, and that is the third state of samadhi, which is referred to as the non-conceptual samadhi of reality itself, or dharmata. And actually all other levels, all the previous levels of samadhi are actually essentially included within this samadhi. And so regarding the first one, for instance, if you meditate for like an hour or so, and then there are a couple of minutes where you're a little bit more restful, and maybe the mind is kind of settling, and so you feel just very at ease. And even though maybe that's a mental state now, so even though maybe if somebody would shoot an arrow at you, you would still be in pain, but still this state of ease is already part of the samadhi of bliss that we mentioned before. It is just that when that is brought to perfection, then even if someone would shoot an arrow, you wouldn't have pain. But even just this beginning feeling of mental ease and bliss like that is part of that samadhi, the samadhi of bliss.
That tinti o the hirab paradisem batela yang yewasum. Tambo tubi hirab sita tubi hirang aso dara saka yore chui tikba nang given the sand go yore teni de gala da mambo hyomogoch. Sambe hira hibandana, teni da tu yoba de la teni suso ke jeba tangne, samno tangne, teni yin da mi la soba, teni techom chia tamje, teni da suso ke gebi hinin tu solo drene. Yang de so ke ma la yumba labja lamtung, mi nga tu so nyamni chike da tandaji ne, suso ke aha kong jo mambo hyuji yore da. Karesina churang ke tepjik lob na, tambo tep ke kare lao na te churang simnang hyagarwa. Di jini churang ke samno namchu piju tangdu tsik ririkane guwa mandawa mambo chi tsar longo yore. Te churang che tsa chimbo yinpa junsin rao jiwa ngama che sanje ke chuba yinpa dana guwa yo mara isi. Tara ngarang su lo de ya gompan rojo yore. Tere. Teni sumba dila gombi hirabsi. Ta gombi hirabsi teni hirab tamje na ke jarbo na ye chado yore. Tan di kabso halang nga so che namju nga so te sungo yore. Dor kan duba ja, dor koran lan duba ja, ta dor duba ja da dibura zubo lan duba ja ne, namkha la yo yodi, teni koran lan duba da man chun dor duba. Mok chu go yo mar so che roba go mar. Ti na ki choran la te chom dang, teni tanda ke che dwa nda wanda mra kare chung na ya, teni choran la lin ja ta ba. Lin ja ba te la yang ke choran ngunne ping ni ba, che te sinju lo ndo ma yin ba ta ti ne gap. Ta yung wanda la ne gomzong ki shira ko tsar zo bu tu song ra cha ge yorba te song res.
And then next is the paramita of wisdom, which also has 3 kinds. And first is the wisdom that comes from hearing or learning, which is learning something is just like accumulating drops of water. And so there it's pretty clear what that means, so there is no need to explain that much. And then the second wisdom is the wisdom arising from reflection. So here we are reflecting upon what we have heard, the teachings. We are analyzing them, contemplating the teachings. Is it really like that or not? And if we have doubts about a certain point, we then ask our teacher, and then we take the instructions, and then we keep practicing them. So for example, when you're reading a book, first you understand the book, but then you begin to think about it, what actually is said in that book. So you're using your own intelligence to analyze the words in the book, and you might get a great variety of different understandings of each word. You can interpret it in different ways. So in order to be able to do that, you do not have to be a very special like Turku incarnation from a previous life. It is just this is how we now increase our comprehension, our understanding. And then the third wisdom is the wisdom arising from meditation, and that's like the king of wisdom. And how that arises is just like a snake that is coiled up. In order to uncoil itself, the snake doesn't need any help. So by, for example, throwing it in the air or so, it actually uncoils itself. It doesn't need anyone's help. So it's just like that. Through meditation practice, all these knots of uncertainty and doubts in one's mind will naturally become uncoiled, like a coiled snake. So then, as a result, you will be able to answer your own questions. And this is really when your practice has become truly beneficial. That's the actual benefit, is to have that certainty that is completely non-misleading. So that is what happens when one has brought to perfection the wisdom arising from meditation.
다 남주 냠 곰냠 식다 띵인 진투서 냠 샤야 요러와 때 항상에 야보레스 이나양 삼종게 다라 히랍 비주 땅도 소소게 제 고동라오 제 파란와 제 요러와 다텔 냠 무스 라코 요마레 ta de nga ke puke nang ke che kwa lin dang we de nga de la che kwa ji da no tin so te kar chen bo ja ri kya te yu hyu ge samjong ki hirab de la yin ji na nga so nam ju intellectual se ba de pha je bi ju tong ho sa re intellectual is intellectual sambatel karsi ta te tang du che te kin de sa re puke na ti samjong se sam no ta wan da wo ji re ta nam ju sam no ta wa se ne che ti na ni hira long khum da ya ka pha sam no ro tang ya wa ro cha ya ba ro ma to ke kan ta lok chi zu de wa ro ma to ke ti na lab za ngune ke che teng sa bon ro hira long khum bu ke na to re yin ji na ta ro yin ne bu ke nang ti ne tin ta la sam no ma teng sa ro ma tang de ta hi gom ja gom nyan te ra ngune samjong ki hirap te ni samjong ki hirap za che de ya te kare chin za che de su su lo la chang gu jo tong ya njro wa tong ya da de so cham che la nu ba chen bo yu de ba je su su ke lo de ya gom jong ki hirap la yang po go ra samjong ki hirap de ten po la teni tara nyam te che ra ya gom nyam te che ra ya samjong ki hirap de nu ba chi ya den ra yung ko sa ores teni nga so intellectual shi ba de check de aran bi ju ta nan de de tin an ko ji ling go nga ran chun ta nam bo ku chu ba yin be cha ni ko ji ling tin an intellectual si de ko da za ko sam no tang ya ba ji ri ti ma lam sang ma ji check de ji san ram ro ne check de ko ran ne ji ling na ling jo sa ri sam song yin na ta nge ta ji de de ri se ta chu chu ma re de cha na ba san tang ro nang
So then when this wisdom that arises from meditation arises, that's really incredible. But actually, the wisdom arising from reflection or contemplation is actually even more powerful than that, because first of all, before we go there, it's good to understand this term reflection, this experience. Now, from a Tibetan perspective, taking the Tibetan term, so the Tibetan term is sampa, sam, and so it's a quite important term, even in that, to really understand what is really meant, because it could be. This is a very common term that could be interpreted in different ways. So it's important to understand what is really meant with that term, sampa, or the wisdom that comes from reflection or contemplation. So sometimes people translate this term, sampa, as like intellectual, like an intellectual understanding, for example. And of course, this term sampa is a very broad term and can be translated in many different ways, like reflection and intellectual thinking and contemplation and thinking and so on. So it's generally speaking fine to translate it either way. But what is really meant here in this context is really important to understand. And that's also not so clear in the Tibetan, because the Tibetan is also a broad term and could mean different things. But then if one just leaves it with thinking that, okay, sampa means, because normally sam just means to think, something intellectual, then one might just think that, I just think about it, which is basically we are using our intellect to just conceptualize. We think about something and then just think that this is what is meant, when actually the real meaning is much more profound than this. It's not just thinking about something conceptually, intellectually, but it's more profound. And it is because it implies a real contemplation. You really, like a deep thinking about something. And it is that deep thinking, this profound thinking, that leads then to the wisdom of meditation later on. So it kind of propels one to the wisdom of meditation, which is why the wisdom of reflection is so powerful and more precious than the wisdom of meditation. So it is because this wisdom is changing your mind. If you really think about something deeply, like really contemplate something, it moves or changes your mind. So that's why it's so powerful, because it has the power to move you from reflection to meditation. That's why it is the more powerful kind of wisdom. And so, in general, now this term samba, we can in general say that it could have to do with the intellect and just thinking about something. But now, in the context of Dharma practice, we have to get a deeper understanding of this term. It's not just thinking about something intellectually, but it's much more than that. It's a deeper kind of thinking. And so this is just my take on that term. Of course, I'm not like deciding on that for you, so you also have to think about it yourself.
Yeah, that is Jancho's Meji Bujo ye Nangano, Uruati Nang about. About Mentumpo chop on what in Bas, Alamambo Tisante. That's your lesson that. Maintain power, Sakasan. That left that.
Oh, really?
That left so. That they got a digba can temperature bata, the damal use summer shows. Show, such the Mola in Baje Hako Goyora. They then that digba canta, Janchuk sem. Mejiva chin dunkin jig. Ji de na ya compart the Mondonki jin dunkin. That did of digba ganda, Gaina. Then the tam use Janwar shows. Jang chop she be don't know Jang said upon me by young show she be don't chag Yoruba.
So that completes the 4 causes of not forgetting bodhicitta. And so then the next point, which you mentioned last time, which is number 5, is the abandoning the all unfavorable conditions. And in the blue prayer book, it's on page 54. Let's see. So I think it's that verse here. So it's still under section 2 on page 54, but the last one, the 4th one of section 2, which is it's the second sentence of section 2. Oh, is it? Wait a minute. It's like it's it's a second part of the second sentence. So it's a little. So the first part was the 4 causes of not forgetting bodhicitta, which is may I never disregard my intention to attain enlightenment. And then the second part is, and completely remove whatever faults obscure my path. So yeah, this is kind of made a whole section here in Tibetan, but it's like half a sentence. So that's half a sentence here. So, again, this sentence, which is one complete sentence in Tibetan, begins with may. And so may always means I pray that. And so we pray that first I don't forget about bodhicitta, and then on top of that, that bodhicitta even further increases. And in order for that to happen, I have to purify all negativities. So this is really a prayer. So that literally says, look at the Tibetan now. May I purify without exception all those obscurations, such as negative actions and so forth. That's kind of the literal meaning. And purify means, so in Tibetan that is this term jangwa, and it means, this term implies that something that's there is completely eliminated.
That day, around the Zambo Molan Donde Yahurina Tanaja Goyore. Sarche Donde Tasusoke Numonto La Cate Jankin Rawaji Nibo so ya Gun Lambotonin Don. That Remji Rodando. Then it's tiny band of Don, but Capsula tin nimbo so pa dong tong na ta hi ta dong to sa kar nga hi ba ngan jin tel thok de yorwa terwa janjo san la parche chin dong ki ti tel khate cha ya ndaw la ma dong tong ne tanda ndaw ji ti char sum ba long dong de ti ko ng su je ma khate cha ne ma ji yom ya ndaw je tanda ndaw ji thom na ti char sum dong ba ina te ne pion ti tel chang ma ta tang mu se man tam tap chung ndaw ji go da tambo de la ya lang so ni ba de la quran ni pan che so ai tambo la ya lang so ni bo ya lang ni bo se ya jing go ro sen ni ba ni bo ra te pan za ni che go ro che ti sum bu gap sung sun tam thok do ji ne ni de ji tom na de ni ta lam sang sang je ma so na ya ni ma de ni mo ni ma de la de ni nga de ma so nga sa ya ke dong ha chim bo de ma chung ro dong to ya ta na sung do.
So when you're practicing when you're reciting the prayer for excellent conduct, ideally you would do it in this following way. For example, you recite it a few times, then the first time you recite it, then as you recite it, first you are kind of bringing up, you're kind of giving rise to the antidotes that will then later oppose the afflictive emotions. So first you're just bringing it up in your mind. And then during the second recitation, then you cause the antidote to actually meet with what needs to be abandoned. So then you are basically applying the antidote to the self-grasping, because the self-grasping is really the one that hinders the arising of bodhichitta. And then in the third recitation, so first the antidote meets with what is to be abandoned, and in the third recitation, then the actual abandonment is really executed. So then the affliction, what is to be abandoned, which is basically self-grasping, is completely abandoned. And then even if you're not enlightened right away, at least this feeling of me, I didn't, this feeling of I that causes you all your misery in your mind of I've done this or that and so on, this feeling of me will get a little bit lesser.
Le ta nyu mong du je le nam le tor xin ji tin ro wa nam su che tar pi mo chu mi cha ba yin ne da nan kha tho pa me tar je song ta te tam bo pe ga lang de ma hyun le la sa re me to pe ma de ta cho gan dam nyo na na je yong go yo re te ta ti kap so ma cha hi ban de ka re ko go si na ti dam de chma ka ma gu pa la ko go yo re s me ma gu ba te yindo pe te yindo teni nga cho ke ta roa re to kawa ji wa lang so ma na ti ke nyumong ji yore roa re la nyumong hyuk chi chong re yore roa me nga so taran di me nan du kham se den do ba hyuk chen bo yo ba tena re te ta hyuk che na re chong re ti ke nyumong te ke ma gu ba teni jang chok sem nyam su le ba yin pin kan dar yin pin nyam su le ba Raji Yong Hos. Ta de da yin bin de la yang pe yin da ni da nang kha to par me da je pe de ge ding ge yor. Gandar sina nang kha ni ni ma da da wa tham je kon tan to me ba de ni ro do ge yor es. Ta ro si ba de ya ngarang sun ji tin de ya ta de da ni ma ro yo ba no thong ro ba de ta ji res. Ta de yin ya ni ma koron so la o nga ke ti mu pa de sel go nge di mba sargmen san ni ma dawala namdo mi pa yindo ngarang zo ge yindong zhonde tene nge te chi go te chi mo sa ya gen zimba me pa je tenda ge thoni yong hyo sta te mi pe thoni tene tenda nyam ni chi to ba ina tene le de nyom mo ba tham je na pang to ku yore kan sin na redo yo ma ra redo
Then next we come to the third of those 16 chapters. The third one is the aspiration to be free of defilement. And the prayer is on page 54, number 3. May I be free from karma, emotional afflictions, and the influence of demons, like the lotus unsoiled by the Maya, or like the sun and moon in a clear sky, so that I may proceed unhindered. So this example of the lotus unsoiled by the Maya, lotus flower grows in the mud, and when it grows out of the mud, it is undefiled, unstained by the mud itself. So unsoiled is to be unstained by the flaws. So for example, if one is born anywhere in the 6 realms of samsara, so generally speaking, each of the 6 realms is related to a certain afflictive emotion. Depending on which is stronger, we take birth there. So now we are born in the human world, and the human world is called the desire realm. So that's our predominant emotion, is the desire. And so one is born like a lotus flower. So may I be born like a lotus flower in this world, but even though I'm born in this desire realm, for example, may I be unstained by the affliction, by the afflictive emotion, and practice instead altruism and bodhichitta. And then an example of this altruistic mind is like the sun and the moon in a clear sky that is unhindered. So the sun and the moon in space move unhindered. So maybe the sun doesn't really move, but from our perspective, from the world, it looks like it's moving. And so that it's moving unhindered through space. And the sun also has no deliberate intent, such as thinking, I must dispel darkness, or I'm not going to dispel darkness here. So the sun and the moon have no thought of illuminating. They just do it naturally. And so this is a prayer similarly. May I engage in the benefit of others naturally, without even having to think, I'm going to do this or that. Basically, engaging in the benefit of others without any fixation or grasping in the mind. And then if one is able to practice in this way, one is able to abandon karmas and afflictive emotions. And as a result, one will become without any hopes or fears.
Du le nam se sondwa du le kareri se du ta chi hine tang lam thong gong kin ji ina ne du de kareri nam yin ri yingwu lam la du chi parche mangs tane nam yin te cha yong go yore jimba ge du ne sena cha de yore zubu ge du ne control cha de yore zundu gu du ne lelo cha de yore hira gu du ne timok cha de yore tsutong gu du ne chakwa cha de yore ta de tamje le drawing song de de song go yore tin ta na le yin yu ban de ne ta le number min ba do so la rewa mi ba ma cha ba ta de la so ba song go yo ba res.
And then it mentions here the influence of demons, or it literally says the activities of demons. And so if one is a practitioner of shamatha and vipassana, of meditation, then the demon that one encounters in one's meditation is distraction. It is said that on the path of meditation, there are many obstructors, many demons of distraction. So that the demon of meditation is distraction. The demon of generosity is stinginess. The demon for patience is hatred. And the demon, when we practice diligence, is laziness. And the demon, when we practice wisdom, is ignorance. And the demon, when we practice discipline, ethical discipline, is attachment. So may we be free from all these demons. And then the various other activities of the maras, of the demons, which may mature, which may ripen. So, for example, may that not ripen means may I be without hopes, may I be without attachment, and so forth.
Then that led the turn to tarwa, singaranzo tarba siji the dechaga yura, tarba top city, leg zawate numon to the yuri. Numon ke, then it coke ten lekadamras in the leso no yoruba. Then it ends that numon led the numon back near the church turned tarwa tablet. Tangaranzo tarwa kadit to yurisine. When you drop gonyali chin, chusu check rena, the semjulata numon miswa. The dark to Tony Zama, the one Yamliti take up Tawa top deba, the Dare. In a yata, Chusu check the genie, a young Montuna data will go Yamli Matona, then a young Sendeke, Chadam Muson, the Serhondu, young Siji, Korana, Sadebaji, Chadayuza, then a Naransuta, Tawa to Hiba, the Gawat, Chatop goers, and let the Newman Bani let Targo Uris. Tell Kani Molanja Yenitine, some gumchine, Targo Yures.
So we speak about this attaining liberation. And liberation depends on liberating one's karmas and afflictive emotions. The root of all karma, the seed of all karma, are the afflictive emotions. We engage in all sorts of activities with a mind that is afflicted. So our activities are driven by an afflicted mind, and as a result, we accumulate karma. When we separate from these afflictive emotions, we become liberated. And so when does that really happen? For example, when you're meditating and you're really meditating for an hour, say an hour, and during that time your meditation is completely pure, you are practicing without developing afflictive emotions this entire hour, then for this duration of time, at that time you have attained liberation. But then after that 1 hour, if you're not sustaining that an ongoing state of meditation, then again you will begin to develop negative emotions that are ordinary. For example, attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And so again you fall back into samsara. So attaining liberation means to separate from karmas and afflictive emotions, and in order to do that, we recite these prayers, and then we develop wisdom that comes from reflection and practice.
Then the song then I hear it da Naran so good part the simba drupo ke doso tarangaran to do lamdo and so. Lungus don't go your race. Naran so man away na mate. And I be jago and I jago se satrachibo multe de waina. Mune majasal tapsdu a data tata young tomata tetson race. The din I think tarangaran so new months starting watching drat and raji. Groceries, them and Yobachi pot the Vedena, my deatham Mandangpa, Musun Rone, Pachuso, Tandrake, Kangayos, a pen of Zubangune Gongosake, Tandrake, Nan Pansuhugine, Tane Zubakanyamichi. Then it's Ramson Lasovata, the Hindaga Parsin Samate, nana hyone teni ta tinane teni pa yolle jarzo gro tenro ya cha andu teni ta yimpin ka rodun lap chimbo yongwa ta to so ke ngune chedi hyu yongre se tanda song do tin tan de ra cha bo hyu ra cha bo hyu gro tanda chi cha de yore yang ganza la tu ra so so ka he yang je sa win ba ne win ba la teni gomya ni bo ndong yar jin rong ke yore 대다 수수소소 하고 그러면서 나타나고 있지. 니가 나자고 나오지. 너.
Buena dona yang kala yo sala dona.
니가.
So now here in the context of the 6 paramitas, so now we have just mentioned there is this demon and that demon, or this Mara, that Mara. So basically what this Mara demon is the opposite. It's an opposite that opposes an opponent to the 6 paramitas. For example, when you go to war, you are planning to fight your opponent, your enemy. And so if you, so before you go to war, you're making your plans. So if you're just looking at the map and kind of decide I'm going to attack here and there, but just looking at the map without any practical experience, then when it's actually time to make war, it is very unlikely that everything will happen exactly the way you imagined by looking at the map. So we have to actually get in there to get the experience. So similarly, if we just think about that Dharma practice from a more distant perspective, kind of reading a book and thinking that, oh, this is how it should be and this is how it probably is, that's just not enough. But one should actually really go there, go to where it's difficult, and then just not read about patience, but actually practice patience at a place where it's difficult. So this is how one actually practices patience, by going somewhere where one can practice patience. Or the same is true for any of the other paramitas, for example, ethical discipline and so on. And by being in the situation that triggers the need to practice this paramita, that is how you overcome that Mara demon that opposes it. And if you're able to overcome that, then you will be able to really benefit others in a really vast way. And then you become a real authentic practitioner. And so, however, it of course depends on the person. Not everyone is the same. There are some people for whom it is suitable and whose practice does develop and they seclude themselves to an isolated place to meditate. But basically, this is something that you have to know for yourself. Maybe both of these ways have their their benefits.
Ateri kantar nyamata dawala pe ya de suso rangun ne rewa tang topan mi dewa ta tenda je toni pe zo ya yung ko yure. Ni nga zo namju ta je tawa tokche tawan thombo tokche la redo de nyong go yure. Redo katse china da mak ke churang teri se konse ke jago ma suso ngane tawa te che de ba je yan ro to ta ro. Mak churang te tawa bi mo sin lab na mak lab shi ma ro. So rang sang da ka che rewan do ka che to pan do. Re do de ka che chimbo na te zang so ju la tawa de hyuk chung ta re ngene. Da le jum re hi ban da la che ngene ke zin jo dang den ra go do ka che yu ba de ge ju ba de he ren ro go yo re si. Yin le chi chek ji na ya zab zab ji chek zu boy ji na zab zab ji malab thab hi ji ya ro da ka sa chi te ne yo ro te ta yo ke ju ba de he ren ro ba ta de churang le jum ne la ngi hi ji ba ta re do ba de nam do chong ro de ta wa le ka za ya zo ya la kompan ro na ta ji ndu de ta ta na ji yong wa mo lam yo si.
So the sun and the moon here are and also an example of being free from hopes and fears. So when one's realization of the view of the natural state increases, as our realization increases, proportionally, one's hopes and fears will decrease. So they're kind of inversely related. When one goes up, the other one goes down. And so therefore, the greater your hope and fear, actually the lesser will be your realization. And however great or lesser your hopes and fears really are is something that you know it for yourself. Nobody can tell you that. Nobody can say really that your realization is not so great. So it's something that you have to see for yourself. How many hopes do I have? Do I have a lot of hope and fears? And if you find that I am afraid and I do have a lot of hopes, expectations, then it's a sign that your realization of the view is lesser. And then also it has to do with your conduct, your activities on observing the principles of karma, cause and effect. The more refined your conduct is in this regard, also the kind of greater sign it is that you have gained real certainty in karma. For example, then you would be able to be careful and restrain yourself, for example, when it comes to maybe wanting to say something offensive to someone, like something harsh, then you would try not to say that, and so forth. So if you're very precise, careful about your conduct, it's a sign that you have gained certainty in karma. And if you are without much hopes and fears, it's a sign of practice, of meditation. So anyways, I hope that this, I pray that this is the case for you.
Thank you very much.
And we do dedication, page 11 and then 16. Just the first verses in the yellow prayer book. By this merit may I attain omniscience. Having defeated the enemies, my wrongdoings, may I liberate all beings who are tossed in the ocean of samsara by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And page 16. Just as the hero Manjushri realized things as they are, and as did Samantabhadra too, I will follow in their path and perfectly dedicate all these virtues. And then the blue prayer book, page 64, verse 21. May every being ailing with disease be freed at once from every malady. May all the sickness that afflicts the living be instantly and permanently healed.